I think we ought to be starting if we're going to make sure that we get through this talk. I will do as best I can to slightly speed it up so we've got enough time for questions. So if you're out in the lobby, can you just come back in, please? If you're out in the lobby, can you please, if you're intending to sit down. And we're going to try and make sure we have some time for questions. So can we sit down, please? Thank you. We'll restart shortly. Restart very shortly, friends and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to do our utmost to get through without having to be thrown out at the end. Have some time for questions. Okay, I'm going to make a start again. Are the people doing the filming ready? I don't know whether is Svetlana about. Is that one running? Okay. I think we need to make a start again. Thank you for your patience. And the fact that we had to wait a bit at the beginning, that was outside our control. So we're going to restart, and there will be questions at the end. We'll do as best we can to make up time. And I will start on this talk. This talk is, of course, much more on the philosophy of what is underlying the issues about science. I'm just going to record on my own phone, and don't worry, I can't actually see your faces, but it's just nice to have a little record of what's going on. And I just need to say something to the filmers, just need to say something to you, just before you start. Okay, we'll make a start. Has science killed God is what I'm addressing. Obviously, we all know that the atheists like Lawrence Krauss, Jerry Coyne from the University of Chicago, Lawrence Krauss from Arizona, and Richard Dawkins and plenty of others, Michael Shermer, are basically saying you can't use science and believe in God. I take very much the opposite point of view, and I would say that historically people are not of that view. Even in more recent years, if you only go back 50 years, this is what happened.
All the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8, has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light. That it was good.
That was 50 years ago, 1968, just over 50 years ago, almost, with the Christmas time when it happened. Now, you might say, that they weren't real scientists. Actually, they were. They knew what they were doing. They were engineers. They had to go through hard science training. And so don't suggest to me that even those people were ignorant people. They were not. I'm not saying, by the way, that they necessarily believed everything in the Bible, but they were quite happy to read Genesis 1:1. So contrast that with this gentleman who died last year. He said these words earlier. The human race, this is Stephen Hawking, of course, the human race, chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet orbiting around the very average star in the outer suburb of 100 billion galaxies. We're so insignificant that I can't believe the whole universe exists for our benefit. Very sad contrast. Is he right? I'll show to you that actually from the science primarily, and that's what I will spend most of my time on, this first point. Then on rationality, then the bottom one, ethics, and finally meaning. that the atheist position is incoherent. It doesn't work. I have a DVD, by the way, which I would encourage you to get, which is at the front. It's similar to what I'm doing now, although not put in exactly the same way. It's called A Skeptical Look at Atheism. And I would encourage you to rethink if in fact you are an atheist, and be open-minded to actually consider the Christian position, which is very robust indeed. We're first of all going to look at the science, and as I say, we'll mainly consider the science. We're going to actually consider this, first of all, by defining what we mean by science. And then we'll consider what we mean, of course, by God, which was the name in the title. We need to ask the question, what is science? Famous scientists, some examples of science, and then who is God? And we'll be looking at these matters. So we need to address the question, first of all, what is science and who is God? What is science? Well, science has to be testable by definition. As I was doing my work on the Bombardier Beetle, I had to be able to test what I was looking at, or the theory as to what I was considering. Science can really only just knock down hypotheses, and gradually, if you can't knock it down, it can become more robust and resist those who might say, oh no, it's not due to that, it's due to this or whatever, and that the result could be also simulated by some other means, whatever. And so you have these debates in the scientific community, and eventually, after a lot of work, a lot of people testing that hypothesis, you might develop a workable theory. Let's look at some of these things. Science can only operate in the physical world. I will be looking at some examples of science, but let's look at some of these definitions. Science has to be testable, and science, by definition, can really only operate in the physical world. Let me just unpack this a bit. Have you heard the statement, science has all the answers? Have you heard things like that, or words like that? Have you heard PBS do that, or the BBC in my country? People are constantly saying, you know, it's like a mantra, that if you're going to actually bring on a scientist, he's one who is secular, he won't believe that there are any things that science can't answer. Is it true or false? It's manifestly false, and I'll show you why. Because science deals with what? It doesn't deal really with why it's there at all. It deals with the how. So it describes what's there. You've got to do that carefully. Then you deal with the how. How does it work? Like I did with the beetle. Not why we are here at all. It doesn't deal with purpose. Neither does it deal with meaning. It can't of itself give meaning. So science isn't something which can give all the answers. We've just shown that. And let me make another point about science. It has to be repeatable. And by definition, origins has happened once and cannot be repeated. It might suggest some aspects of what you think was going on in the origins that you believe happened, but that's not the same as repeating the complete experiment. You can't do it. So do recognize that there are limitations to science. Let me also show you something about famous scientists. Have you heard this statement? Scientists don't believe in God. Have you heard that? Right? Have you heard that on PBS, CNN? Even Fox News might suggest it. Look, is that true or is it false? No, it's false. And I can prove it to you by looking into the history of science. Isaac Newton may not have been a traditional Bible believer in that he didn't believe that Jesus was God, as far as we can see. I think he was more a Unitarian. But nevertheless, he believed in God. Robert Boyle certainly believed in God. Michael Faraday did remarkable experiments and yet gave glory to God and believed in the Lord Jesus Christ much as Christians do today. Johann Kepler, brilliant scientist, gave the very laws, or discovered the laws of how the planets go round the sun, and understood the the time that it would take for a planet at a certain orbit to go through a certain angle subtended at the sun, and so on and so forth. In other words, people could then begin to predict the movement of the planets, movement of Jupiter's moons, and so on and so forth. James Clerk Maxwell was ardently a Christian. He died at 49, but in that short life, he did a remarkable amount of work on chemistry, some on colours and the physics of colours, but in particular the thing which he's noted for is that he understood the connection of electricity with magnetism from a theoretical point of view that Michael Faraday had discovered right earlier on. And he then said, well, there are two equations which model electricity. There are two mathematical differential equations which are to do with magnetism. So he looked at the electricity two equations, the magnetism two equations, combined them together, got four equations, and said, hey, there is a wave equation in here. Found out what the wave equation was, and found out that it depended just on two parameters, and was able to predict the speed of light. The permittivity of free space and the magnetic equivalent. Those two things enabled him to say, I know what the speed of light was. Later on, people measured the speed of light, and it was exactly what he had predicted, 300,000 meters per second, or roughly that. Lord Kelvin gave his name to the laws of physics, of heat, basically, and temperature in the Kelvin scale. Louis Pasteur, and there are others here which we could think of. Now, friends, these people believed in God. There is absolutely no doubt that they did. Professor Steve Taylor, whom you won't know, these are from my country, Professor Stuart Burgess, Professor Colin Garner, Professor John Lennox, Professor David Galloway from Scotland. He's an expert in medical work, and John Lennox is well known as a mathematician. Colin Garner is a thermodynamicist. Stuart Burgess co-wrote that book with me that I mentioned earlier. And Stuart Burgess is a mechanical engineer. Steve Taylor is an electrical engineer. Guys, it is false to say that scientists don't believe in God. There are plenty in this country, scientists in leading universities in America who believe in God. So what do we say about God? Well, if he exists, he's in a realm which is essentially non-physical. He is transcendent. He is above nature, right? We're not talking about God who is part of nature. We're not talking about worshipping a tree or something which is part of nature, like the sun, and the Egyptians worshipping the sun. He is all-powerful and able to interact with the physical world. So that God we're thinking of is the God who's made everything. So the question, who made God, which is often jokingly put back to us as though it was really something serious, is in fact a non-question. Because we are talking about the origin of the whole universe. We're saying that a finite universe, very large, indeed, is made by an infinite God. Interestingly, those who take an evolutionary position end up with an infinity at some point. They will either say that it's a constant universe which has always been there, sort of steady state idea, or else they'll say that there is multiverses and they've got an infinity of options. Friends, you cannot escape it, that there is the possibility you could be wrong on that, and that an infinite God has made a very large, granted, huge, gigantic, but finite universe. Let's look at some examples of science. I'm going to look at my own subject of thermodynamics. I'm sure that's not you, that the more you think, the more confused you get. I'm sure you understand thermodynamics. We all do we not? That probably isn't the case. So let me just try and help you through a very simple 101 on thermodynamics. Many people say, well, you know, any appeal to thermodynamics is dead in the water because you've got an open system with the solar system and planet Earth. So they say there's loads of energy out there in order to eventually develop sophisticated machinery. I'm not, of course, talking about nuts and bolts, but the machinery of life, DNA, RNA, all the things that we need for life. In fact, Richard Dawkins said the same to me in one of the encounters that I had with him on the media. But what they fail to realise is that in order to make use of the energy that's certainly coming in across the boundary of the Earth's atmosphere, from the sun or wherever you're considering energy coming in order to make use of that, you've got to have channels, very special chemical pathways in order to, and I'm going to use a term here that not all of you will follow, some of you will, in order to raise the local free energy which enables you to do useful work. Just to explain this a bit more, a leaf, which I'm going to come to in a moment, is a system whereby you can take the energy from the sun and using very, very carefully brought together chemistry, which I'll show you, you can actually locally raise the energy in order to make a certain reaction take place, which wouldn't happen if the energy was just hitting a dead stick. The plants are doing very sophisticated systems. The proposal, of course, that you can just get random energy to build the machinery of life is frankly thermodynamically wrong. And I'm going to show you. Random energy does not build the machinery of life. I'm not talking about nuts and bolts, right? I'm talking about the machinery, which I'm going to be referring to now, of living systems. So I just said to you that the photosynthesis of a leaf is actually, looks so simple, but it's in fact incredibly sophisticated. Running through this talk is a principle, as indeed it was with the Bombardier Beetle, of irreducible complexity. A number of things must be there together in order to make the photosynthesis of a leaf to work. Let me show you. You all know, don't you? I'm sure this is well known that, well, it probably isn't so well known, I'm being slightly sarcastic here, but carbon dioxide and water is what produces the sugar which we all love, but I'm not talking about that sugar. I'm talking about sucrose, or something like it, which a plant needs in order to grow. It is true that the radiant energy of the sun causes the carbon dioxide in the air, plus the water in the plant, to combine and to produce the sugar and actually produce oxygen as well. But if somebody says to me that energy on its own would do that, they are actually wrong. They are catastrophically wrong, to quote Richard Dawkins. In fact, they are so wrong that they miss one of the major concepts of thermodynamics, which is that you need to raise the free energy. The free energy is the energy available to do work. This is this term here, the free energy, which corresponds to reducing the entropy. If you don't understand the terms, don't worry over much, but sufficient to say that you've got to get the energy to go down a particular pathway to make a certain reaction take place. And there is a catalyst called chlorophyll, which makes sure that this happens. The energy on its own does not do that. You need an irreducibly complex system of chemical reactions, plus the chlorophyll being there, right? And other things also have to be there. It's no coincidence that water has to be drawn up in the plant, and of course you've got to have carbon dioxide in the air. Well, if you're trying to deal with the origin of life systems, you've got a number of things which have to be right in order to get photosynthesis working. Let me now come on to another issue, and that is still on molecular machines and in a sense, I was talking about a machine in terms of the chlorophyll photosynthesis system. Now I'm going to refer to other molecular machines in the cell. And one in particular, the cell is like a city, as I'm sure you well know. It's far more complicated than running Washington, D.C., or running the government when it is running. It's much more complicated than that. The molecular machine that I'm referring to, which is just one of thousands in the cell, right? I'm just going to home in on one, is a machine called adenosine triphosphate, commonly known as ATP. Now, it's not, the ATP isn't the machine is actually what you've got there, which is ATP synthase. That's what the machine is called. The machine makes ATP, and adenosine diphosphate comes in, and it produces, with the it produces adenosine triphosphate. You don't need to know all the detail. Suffice to say that all the cornflakes and all the stuff you push into your body, whether it be a Big Mac or whatever it is, eventually gets down, broken up into all sorts of molecular ingredients, which will be of the nature of ADP eventually, right? Adenosine diphosphate. And then there's this system of proton gradient going across a membrane, which actually eventually makes adenophosphate in sufficient quantities to keep you going. If that motor wasn't there, you would be dead in the next microsecond. Every single cell of your body has to have ATP, including plants. It's another example of irreducible complexity, and it's an electrostatic motor of which Faraday would be overjoyed to have seen. All those components, the membrane, the proton gradient, the cyclic nature of that motor, all those things have to be there to begin with. You cannot evolve an irreducibly complex system gradually. That is the issue. It's not the matter of how complex it is. So if you come with a question telling me, oh, you're just believing in a God of the gaps, your argument is just appealing to complexity, you have not understood the point that I'm making. I repeat, it's not a matter of it simply being more complex. Oh, therefore God must have done it. That's not the argument. The argument is that there are layers of complexity where each layer is dependent on another system, and that system is dependent on the first one. And it's not just two, it's 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 100 systems all going on at once. The best way I would liken it to, and I said this on the local TV station, is that it's like an aeroplane, right? An aeroplane doesn't just work with one wing, you've got to have two wings. That isn't enough either. Wilbur and Orville Wright realised that you need to have a tailplane. They have theirs at the front, but that doesn't really matter. They understood the principle, and you also need to have control surfaces in order to turn it and do all the other things that you need to do. You also have the small little problem with getting back down on the ground again, and lots of other issues like that. It is irreducibly complex. Now, I know about aviation. That's why I use that example. Let me give you another illustration. Some of you might like the old steam engines. Some people, will go miles to see these old steam engines. Hugely inefficient, but wonderful to watch as they thunder down the railway. What would it be if you had a railway with steam locomotives like that, but you were still building the railway as the engine was going along? You'd think that's nuts, wouldn't you? In fact, you would think that it was a bit like Wallace and Gromit, which I'll show you now. With the diamond. I'm sure you'd love to see the rest of it, but I've made my point, okay? And by the way, it's a British film by Nick Park, of course, and just fly the flag a bit. But that film shows to you the ridiculous idea of building rails as you go along. That's not quite true that what I'm now going to show you, which is the kinesin molecule, that itself is not building the rails, but the system as a whole is building they don't call it rails, they will call it microtubules, as the kinesin is walking along those microtubules. Now, this is utterly staggering when you consider what's going on.
Masterpieces of microengineering, kinesins are miniature motorized machines that carry cargo from one part of the cell to another, walking along self-assembling highways called microtubules. Known as the workhorses of the cell, kinesins or globular heads that literally walk. One side attaches to the microtubule and the other binds with ATP, the energy molecule of the cell. When one foot binds with ATP and uses its energy, the foot flips over in the walking motion. Each foot has a short neck which is connected to a strand of a long coiled stalk. At the end of the stalk-shaped tail, which holds tightly to the cargo being transported.
I think you'll agree with me that that is really quite an amazing, and it's all at the nano scale. And of course you've got digital information systems which are on top of these machines that I'm talking about. But they are sophisticated, they are irreducibly complex. I could go on to talk about the digital system. Effectively it's a digital system of the DNA information systems where triplets of nucleotides are coding for a particular amino acid. Number of these amino acids which will of course eventually build up the proteins in our body. Look, wherever this, I think for once I agree with Bill Gates. DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. This programming is sitting on a substrate of machinery, and I use the word machine not to mean nuts and bolts, but I do mean the machinery which locally raises the free energy in order to make things which I haven't particularly gone into detail here, but to make DNA itself, the very thing which is carrying these instructions, in order to make those phosphate bonds which are on the vertical part of DNA, guess what? You need ATP, which is the very thing I've told you is an unstable molecule and actually has a little bit of extra energy which then causes the phosphate work. Now if you don't believe me, you go and read these books which will tell you all the details of this. My point is this, that it's interlocking systems. Are you with me? You understand what I mean by irreducible complexity? So if somebody asks me, oh, you just believe it's too complex, do you know I'm not answering that question? I will, out of courtesy, but I won't give it a lot of time. Because my whole point in this talk is to say to you, you've got interlocking systems, all of which are dependent on one another. That is the issue. It's not what we don't know which leads us to the conclusion of design. It's that which we do know. There's still more to be discovered. So I'm at pains to make that point repeatedly because, to be frank, it's often not understood by those who oppose us. And I'm not blaming for them. They're so indoctrinated with an atheistic, naturalistic mindset that they often don't realize that there is another way of looking at the data. I've been talking to you about the Bombardier Beetle, and I've been showing you how that works, and I've been showing to you also the sophisticated valve system of that Bombardier Beetle was crucial in the way that that beetle would work, such that only when I understood the sophisticated nature of that beetle valve system could I then begin to realize, here's something that I now understand, and eventually it led to the making of those systems which were copying what the beetle was doing. The work, right? It didn't just by a simple trick happen. It happened because we understood what was going on there already, and then that unlocked how to understand the beetle. Let me now move on to my next point, which, as I said to you, it was going to be major on the science, and now I'm moving away from the science. Moving away is probably not the right word. I'm asking a deeper question. but it's related to the science. In fact, two of these points, at least, are coming from the science. This one is certainly moving from the science underneath the science. Let's consider the issue of logic and rationality. I'm asking here the question, where does mathematics come from? Where does logic itself come from? And mathematics is really just the language of logic. So if I make the statement 3 plus 2 equals 5, it's obviously assuming things like what base you're in, which we're using base 10 when we do that. If we say 1 plus 0 equals 1, okay, we're still okay in other bases. But you know what I'm saying here, that you're making a certain number of assumptions, but it's hugely logical. And it's the purest form of logic. Question, where does mathematical logic and even rationality, which is associated with this? J.B.S. Haldane made this comment many years ago, before the Second World War, in between the wars. He said this: if my mental processes are determined solely by the motions of atoms in my brain, we might say today neurons, I have no reason to suppose that my beliefs are true, and hence I have no reason for supposing my brain to be composed of atoms. Think for a moment what this is saying. You see, John Lottie over there, whom I got to know in recent months and really valued his friendship. I say, John, you know, I could sort of look at his brain and I could get a big enough computer. It would have to be a big one for John. And, you know, and supposing I even had a quantum computer, right? And I was able to follow all the wonderful stuff that he ate at Cracker Barrel recently, right? And I was able to actually follow all those molecules and all the juices and all the neurons that flowed out as a result into his brain. And I was able to say, right, I've got all the model completely of John Doubting. In fact, I can even tell you what he's going to say next. There would be something wrong there, wouldn't there? You know that there is something wrong. Because that would mean that what he's saying when he talks to me, which, by the way, is very sensible, and I'd encourage you to talk to this encyclopedic mind that John has. It really is brilliant. But, you know, you'd say there's something wrong here. If I can predict it, that means that I'm not really talking with a mind which is thinking in an original way. Indeed, you well know that when somebody suffers from Alzheimer's disease, you should never obviously be unkind to such people, or they suffer from dementia, you say they're only saying that because they're ill. In other words, you are attributing to basically physics and chemistry not going right, they have an illness. But when you know their mind is working, you say, yeah, they're using obviously John is using the engine of his brain, but it's not the brain which is actually making the original thoughts. As we've seen, a train of thought loses all credentials as soon as it can be shown to be wholly the result of non-rational forces. Right? Do you see the point? Argument is a very important one, and people miss this. Many atheists do not answer this point. I tell you, the only atheist that I know who's analysed this argument and admits that there isn't an answer because he's honest, and there are some honest atheists, is Thomas Nagel, who wrote the book Mind and Cosmos, well worth reading, from New York City. Brilliant man, and he says, we have taken on this argument, and it's a powerful argument. And he's got fired at by his own community for giving substance to the arguments, of course, that myself and others are writing. It's not because, by the way, look, I'm concerned for truth, and I hope all scientists are concerned for truth. Why close down the debate in the United States and not allow people who are of an intelligent design persuasion to actually occupy university lecture theatres and to have reasoned debate about these matters, particularly in America, but it's also true in England, are just closing down this debate. You see, naturalism, which is really what the atheists will appeal to, cannot understand rationality. Indeed, he basically says that there is no meaning, that rationality is really not even on the horizon, and yet he's telling me that he knows where his own mind comes from. But actually, he doesn't. He is like this poor person sitting, chopping off the very branch on which he's sitting. Because, you see, I'm making the point here that particles and molecules do not think. So if you reduce it to chemicals and physics, right, like I did try to say with John Doughty's mind and neurons, then you're actually saying that the only way to think it is naturalism. And that very philosophy of naturalism is undermined by the very naturalism that they are proposing. Think on it, friends. This argument actually cannot be answered. Now, it doesn't immediately prove that I'm right, but it does prove that naturalism has this idea that everything is explained would be calculus or whatever it is that you're doing. For anything like that, there is an arithmetical statement, or we might say today, a math statement, that is true, but isn't provable. Let me just say this is a very important theorem, which is known in the mathematical world. There are certain principles which are axiomatic in mathematics itself, which cannot be proved. Do you understand me? There are certain, you say, well, I'm using it, but I don't know that it's true, but I know it must be true. This is heavily linked with this point about rationality. There are axiomatic assumptions which prove that it requires something outside of itself. In other words, the fundamental nature of any rigorous study of reality, or the nature of any rigorous study of reality, whether it be science, is actually appealing to something transcendental. So, friends, I conclude, second point, logic is not part of nature itself. There is a foundation underneath. Then now to the third point. I've looked at science, hard, factual science. I've looked briefly logic and the mind. Let's now look at morality. Now, I'm going to suggest to you that ethics actually has both an absolute and a personal aspect. Now, please note what I'm doing here. I agree with you that I'm not staying hard and fast at this point just in science. But I'm saying to you concerning that which we all know that we experience, which is that there is ethics that we have. Is it right or is it wrong to do something or other? Not just in the sexual area, which we often concentrate on so much today, but maybe in other areas, in the way that we deal with people, in the way that we deal with politics, in the way that we deal with commerce, right? Now, where does all this come from? You might say, surely you're moving into subjective ideas here. Hold on. Hold on. I'm certainly going to say in a moment that ethics is personal, but I'm still going to appeal to you that everything is suggesting there's an absolute aspect to it as well. I once debated, and the debate is down there, just for the debate on flight. Is it something which is designed in nature, or did it just evolve? And William Probyn, who sadly now died, from Cornell University, debated me some years ago. He said this when it came to ethics, that there is no life after death, there's no ultimate ethics, no meaning for life ultimately, and no free will. So Thomas Nagel said something similar in one of the last word. He said this: I want atheism to be true, and I'm made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right, I believe. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the like that. So Thomas Nagel, as I said, he's one of the most honest atheists. Thomas Nagel is recognizing that there is an unease in his position. Jerry Coyne said that evolution is unique amongst the sciences because it strikes people in the solar plexus of their faith. It strikes them at the idea that they are specially created by God because evolution says you're not. Then he goes on to say, it says that there is no special purpose for your life because it's a natural philosophy. He then makes this rather odd statement. You have no extrinsic purpose that a squirrel or an armadillo. Why he chose those two, I'm not sure. But then this is important because I'm talking about morality. He says, thirdly, it says that morality does not come from God, it is an evolved phenomenon. Is he right? Does this match our experience? You see, evolution or atheistic humanism, which we're now considering, regarded as a fact based on atheistic naturalism. Let me give you some shocking truths. Did you know that the US has used, according to the Bible, as a means of judging them? Whatever you think to that, I wonder whether we're any different. Many people would say, well, we're civilized now, we don't offer our children to Moloch. But aren't we perhaps doing something silly? Why has Iceland managed to eradicate Down syndrome? Do you know how they've done it? Just get rid of them. Now, look, friends, yes, healing to your inner sense of conscience, but at the same time, I'm asking you a question. Is that just personal? Or is there a combined conscience of a community? Say what that evolves. I understand that point, and I've often argued against people who say that morality evolves, but how do I know that something is not just wrong for me, but wrong for somebody else? How can it be that if it pleases me, I can murder you, but if it pleases somebody else to murder me, it's wrong? Surely there's got to be an absolute we all appeal to. And there are some things here which are definitely pointing towards a society which all have to agree to. Not just murder, but no paedophilia and stuff like that. As I said, logic is not part of nature itself. I'm appealing to the fact that, yes, there is a subjective side to ethics. Ethics is personal. Also saying that ethics is absolute. Something ingrained in each one of us says, that is absolutely evil. Have you heard? Well, on what basis could they say it's absolutely evil? You are appealing to something outside. Indeed, when I debated Dan Barker, which I know some of you will assume, he thunders against this God that he hates, right? And he says, God is evil. I said to him, on what basis? If you're appealing to something being absolutely wrong, you're appealing to an absolute ethic above you. Ingrained within each one of us is a sense of indignation concerning some things. We may disagree what those some things are, because obviously we've got to agree what the absolute is. Let me now come to my last point, which is meaning. Because meaning and truth surely is where the rubber meets the road. I love this cartoon. If my work helps to feel like a tiny insignificant speck lost in the cold uncaring universe, then I'm doing my job. That was in New Scientist in 2017. A neat summary. Somebody was actually getting at the philosophy of science, was he not? New Scientist published it, almost to be shot at. How would you like it if you were driving, and this is England where we drive on the road, but how would you like it if you were held up in a 50-mile-an-hour limit because of roadworks. It said lane because we felt like it. You'd say, just a minute, hold on, we can't have that. Let me ask you, is true how I feel? Is meaning just the way I feel? Great when you're feeling good. What about if you're about to die of cancer? What about if you've got a daughter dying of leukemia? What about the fact that your grandmother, and it's costing a huge amount to keep her alive, and somebody says, well, she's not really aware of anything now, can't we bump her off? How would you feel if it was your grandmother and somebody said that? Is truth just the way I feel? Is it, as we might say in England, step up a lip, keep calm and carry on? Is this can say? Eventually it'll all come right, you'll get the meaning of what your life is about. I suggest not. Is this reality, friends, just the physical world? And I'm just a speck in that physical world, part of a huge machinery of people and objects and molecules which are 13.7 billion years old, and we're just moving on as a population to something better. Is that my meaning? Some of our teenagers jump off bridges because that's what they're taught by Jerry Coyne at the University of Chicago. That's what they're taught at the University of Arizona by Lawrence Krauss when he said, you're all stardust. Forget Jesus, the stars died that you might be here today. Or is it really that there is a further reality outside? I would suggest to you that's not correct, and that there is another reality. The possibility of supernatural creation cannot be ignored. After all, Ritten said years ago, materialism, in his mind, not in mine, is an absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot at the door. I might suggest to you many people are led by prejudice today. They don't want a divine foot in the universities. This cartoon, superior being, very silly idea, this is our world. And we are masters of our own destiny. Believe me, there are the goldfish in the goldfish bowl, in the living room. Not, by the way, saying the word fool in a derogatory way. The word fool is used in a very specific way. That it's lack of wisdom. Fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And indeed, he knows it if he thinks carefully. This cartoon, insightful, compelling, thinks somebody else as they look at this wonderful modern art picture. Exemplary, says another. In comes the cleaner, says upside down. You see, modern art and the death of a culture is a book by Hans Ruckmarker, but it's actually using this cartoon and that title of that book, that there is search for meaning in a meaningless world. We all know instinctively that there must be meaning, right? You know that. After all, come into the art world. Picasso knew and did actually paint some brilliant, great one for modern art, but some of them are very expressive. This is a famous one. The Crying Woman. And it shows the nationality of modern society, whether it be in Syria, where so many child deaths have been going on, or in the Yemen, or wherever it is, full well. Whether we go back to Vietnam and that famous picture of that girl running naked as napalm was all. I'm not justifying anybody here. It was a terrible war, the Vietnam War, but it was graphic. And it showed to us that something is wrong. Do you get me, friends? Everything is shouting in you that there must be meaning. Francis Bacon, this particular picture, it was brilliant. He said, we've lost our minds. Francis Schaeffer said something similar. He wrote a book called Escape from Reason. That effectively shows it is horrific, of course, but it's deliberately horrific. Man now realizes, Bacon said, that he is an accidentally futile being. No meaning. So meaning, I would suggest to you, is it just personal? No, it's not. No, it's not. Keeping to my thesis that there is a foundation for meaning. Truth is personal, but it's absolute as well. It's both objective, subjective. Now I'm going to summarize where we're at, because we're right at the end of what I want to say. You see, if it is both absolute and personal, and I'm suggesting to you, all our experience tells us that it's not intellectual matter, it's a heart matter. Is there one person in the world who has ever lived who actually dealt with truth in this way? Just intellectualized in an ivory tower, but got amongst the people. Who is he? Or she? You know who. The book says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Jesus Christ said, and the truth. I therefore submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that even if you're not yet convinced, there is a vast Christian position which answers every of those 4 points, particularly the first one on science. Part of nature itself, ethics are personal and absolute, and when we come to meaning and truth, truth is personal and absolute as well, and gives. So look, friends, as we move to my very last point, which is this. I've said, just to summarize, science massively points to the fact that there is a designer. Doesn't tell me who that is. That logic itself also points to the fact that there is something outside of myself, even to understand mathematics. Put very simply, matter left for 7 billion years on its own will not produce mathematics. Never. You can have 1 billion universes, they will never produce logic. But I have a book here which says, in the beginning was the Logos. Do you not think that this might be pertinent? The third point, of course, was ethics. And I've argued that ethics, yes, are personal, but they're also absolute. And the truth and meaning comes from absolutes as well. You might then say, well, look, just a minute. If you're saying that there is a personal God and Jesus Christ is relevant, how can you cope with a suffering world which you've already mentioned? Where is a good God in a suffering world and an evil world? Well, I will tell you what it says. It says that the world was not always like it is now, and that there was a start. Remember, I said that truth is personal. This is why some of us don't get to the answer. We're not prepared to admit that we may be part of the problem. When you are prepared to say that I may be part of the problem, then begin to understand the Bible answer, which says that the world went wrong because our ancestor Adam rebelled against God. So it is, as I've been saying, that truth is personal. It's the Lord Jesus Christ in particular. That logic flows from truth, ethics flows from truth, and truth, personal and absolute, gives meaning. So what's the answer to the fact that we've gone wrong? Well, these are the 4 points that I've been talking about. The answer, of course, is Christ himself, who not only lived a pure life, but died on the cross. The Bible says that he took my guilt in my place, that I might be forgiven. And of course, the one thing that the atheist has tooth and nail is the objective evidence for the resurrection of Christ. I maintain, but it's another talk and I'm not going to do that, I maintain that the evidence is overwhelming that 3 days later, that person who demonstrates the Creator by the miracles he did, not only died, but rose again. Creator God is going to come back yet once again to bring everyone into a personal judgment, unless in what he did on the cross for them. I have a booklet here which is written by a friend of mine. It's called The Relevance of the Scientific Age. If you've been moved to think about these things, come and see me after we've stopped the meeting. Books and other things for sale down there. DVDs are $5. They're all different topics. One of them is on fingerprint of intelligence. Look at them. I think the big books have gone. They've been sold. But there's a few of the other books. Genesis 1 to 11 is there. I also say that if you're a convinced atheist, this is just $1. And it's called Are You Really an Atheist? I wrote it with a desire to approach an atheist, maybe there's quite a few here tonight, who would like to understand position and to change their outlook. So if you'd like that, please feel free to buy that. That's at the front. Don't forget this. Come to me personally for this. The relevance of Christianity in the scientific age. Open it up for questions, which we'll have just. And one last thing to say, there is a DVD which is $6 because it's in a box. This has got the essence of the argument using tonight. It's not filmed in quite the same order, but you're welcome to buy that as well. There's a number of copies of it, and buy it. You may not want to get the other stuff, but you might like to be reminded as to what I've been saying tonight. Or else you want to buy a few of these to give just $6 each. Thank you.
We've got the house tonight till 10 o'clock, so we've got 30 minutes approximately. If you'd like to give a gift, please see Chris Kennard, our friend here, and may it please you a price, because it takes money to put a program on like this. We're so glad to have you, Andy. And I want to start off, I know that we have a professor, a friend of ours. He's from the other camp, philosophically. I promised him he would get the first crack. And, you know, I don't mind a little bit of fireworks. What the academic dean show up, and the head of the biology department, and I said, throw him some hardballs. And we're delighted to have you. So you get the first opportunity.
Well, thank you very much for that. Yeah, my name's Jason, actually a math professor here at JMU. Some years ago, I had John Stoddard in my calculus class, and I spent a profitable semester, merged, no work for the experience, so maybe I'm not so terrible. I am, however, one of those atheist, liberal college professor types that out on the triple threat, and I listened.
Welcome to the meeting. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I listened to your remarks, with great interest. And of course, after speaking for about 2 hours, I mean, I think there's little hope of doing a point-by-point rebuttal to all of them.
I understand.
Yeah, you raise a lot of very interesting questions you addressed. I did, appreciate the moment where you graciously acknowledged that a few atheists can be honest, that we're not all blinked by ideology and and that we're not all blinkered by prejudice and morbid hatred of God and systematically incompetent in our work and remarks incidentally that I'll remember the next time I hear a religious person complaining that Richard Dawkins paints with too broad a brush. I would also point out that very technical science along the way about thermodynamics and whatnot, and I think it's very easy in a venue like this where you have a sympathetic audience to technical detail that sounds very persuasive. But take your remarks about thermodynamics and take it over to the physics department and see how what they think of it. Because I don't think that I'll be finished enough, and because I don't think they would agree with your characterization of thermodynamics. And I think that's true of a lot of arguments that I see in literature. It's all well and good to rail about the inadequacies of the fossil record, but take that to a conference full of paleontologists and see how far you get, or to to rail about it, but take that to a room full of biologists. Okay, so I have no desire to monopolize the time here, and actually I'm specifically interested to hear what other people have to say, so I don't have time. So I'll confine myself to just 2 points, and then at that point I'll hand off the microphone and you can respond how you see fit, and you can have the last word and that'll be fine. One is of a religious character, and the other is of a more scientific character. And with respect to the religious argument, in talking about the Bombardier Raptors, about these beetles, and the image that you invoked was that of a master engineer behind this. That we see such good design, and clearly says the process couldn't do this. It would have to be a master engineer. But when I hear something like that, I'm immediately drawn to all the examples of bad design and poor in physical systems. Take something like pediatric cancer. Okay, and go to visit the children and tell them how well designs are. In the ID literature, I see the immune system, the blood clotting cascade, put forth as just supreme examples of intelligent design. Well, our immune system is so poorly designed that half the time you can't tell the difference between what's an invading what's an invading germ and what's healthy tissue. By umpteen thousands of people die horrible lingering deaths from autoimmune diseases. Tell them how well designed the body is, or tell people who suffer from hemophilia, blood clots, how well designed the blood clotting cascade is. And if the good design of the Beetle is supposed to make me think of a master engineer, while the instances of bad design, I think God is a monster. And please, please, when you reply, spare me the argument that this is all because we live in a fallen world, that Adam and Eve ate a fruit, a few thousand years ago, and that the fitting penalty for that, no second chance, no chance to learn from your mistakes, that is torturing and killing children with dread diseases. If you really think that's plausible, okay, then I'm afraid I'm not going to be accepting lectures on morality from you. And my second point, on the scientific side, you made much of this idea of irreducible complexity, this idea that you have interlocking systems, and if any one part of the system or entire system would fail. Let me suggest that that's just not a good argument. In fact, I think that argument backfires completely on your side. The first thing you learn in engineering school is that if you're building a complex system, you do not build it in a way so that if one part fails, the whole system, that would be the hallmark of bad design. That would be insane design. No human engineer would do that. On the other hand, precisely that sort of interlocking complexity is exactly what we expect from Darwinian evolution. And that point has been discussed in the biological literature going back to 1916, when Hans Moller, a later Nobel laureate, discussed exactly that, pointed out that that kind of interlocking complexity is exactly the end result of Darwinian evolution. So this idea that irreducible complexity is a sign of intelligence backwards, the irreducible complexity is the evidence that it wasn't intelligently designed, that it was made by a blundering prophet of the future. Intelligent design would be if you had redundancies and fail-safes and backup systems. That's intelligent design, so that if one part fails, you don't have much. I'll just wrap this up with one analogy that I think, at least for me, helps clarify some of these issues. This happened to me when I was 10, and I was driving with my dad to his work. And this involved going down a small little 2-lane road, and this road eventually came to a major, not quite a highway, but a major high-speed road. There's a road that had a bend in it, which made it very hard to see cars that were coming from your left. And what we wanted to do was go straight through the intersection. But you couldn't do that. The way the roads were designed, the continuation of our road was offset. Okay? So the idea was you had to come to a full stop, okay, then make a right turn onto a trafficy road where it was hard to see what was coming, and then almost immediately make a left turn. Okay? And I remember, and obviously I was 10 at the time, I had no inkling of evolution or creationism or any kind. I remember asking my father, why were the roads designed this way? That made no sense. In fact, this intersection was very dangerous, and there were frequently accidents at this intersection because of this. So I said, well, why did they design it this way? Why not just make the road, make it like a plus sign, so you can just go straight through the intersection? And he kind of laughed, and he said, no one designed the roads this way. What happened was that the major road had been there for decades. Okay, and then on either side of the road, small towns eventually grew up, and each town independently decided connection to the main road, but they didn't coordinate their efforts. So the result was a very complex system of roads that made no sense. If you tried to view it as the product of intelligence, it made no sense. But if instead you viewed it as the product of a long historical process, where each step along the way made sense, but the end result being kind of ridiculous, then it makes sense. The overwhelming impression that biologists have of the complex systems they study is that, yeah, they're complex, but they're kind of stupidly complex. They're not complex in the way that an engineer would. They're complex in the way that you get from a blundering, evolutionary process where every step along the way made sense, but the big picture did not make sense. Okay, so I greatly get that off my chest, and I'll hand off the microphone now, and I'll just sit here quietly and listen to everyone else from now on.
Let me answer these points. I'll answer the second one first. The second point is...
Andy does. What?
Second point is the one that I'm going to take first. And the second point is basically saying that you'd expect to have interlocking systems if you had an evolved system. Frankly, it's not true. The gentleman is not understanding engineering properly. I'm not saying he doesn't have engineering training. He seems to indicate that he did have some, and I appreciate that. I think you're mainly from the medical world. I may have misread you wrongly.
Math.
Sorry?
Mathematician.
Mathematician. Okay, but when you study engineering, which I've done both mathematics, engineering, I'm not a biologist trained up to the same level, but I've come at biology from a sideways on. You see the mark of brilliant engineering, and I repeat, brilliant engineering. Because what you see is, yes, you see these interlocking systems, but you also do find some fail-safe system which I'm not going to take a long time now to go into. If you want to talk to me afterwards, there are fail-safe systems, which do indicate, just like we do in aviation, that if something doesn't work, there is another backup to carry on. Okay? The human body doesn't completely collapse just when one thing's not working, right? On the macro level. It's even true to a certain extent, even at the cellular level. It's not totally all dependent on one, it's an interlocking system, but we've said enough on that. What really shows to us that there is an engineering design is that you have a numerically, I'm using the word loosely, it's a digital system, right? DNA, right? And that is actually controlling the making of the very ATP, which is absolutely essential to cause the phosphate bonds that I referred to in the main lecture. You've got intertwined systems which are to do with a non-material, because essentially mathematics and coding is non-material, it's software driven, right? A software system has to develop according to evolution from matter and energy. Frankly, that is just never going to be the case. Nowhere do computers, hardware, make their own software from the word go. I know those are expert systems, but the expert systems, of course, are a product of digitally controlled systems to begin with. So it's really just putting the argument down the line. So what I'm saying is, friend, I don't think you're correct. You'll actually see that every single system in the human body is showing marvelous design. One last point on this first point. People thought for a long while Richard Dawkins was in the front of those saying that the eye is wired backwards. Until somebody said, just, do you understand? We didn't say it to Dawkins directly, but I said the articles were written saying that they've now understood Muller cells, M-U-E-L-L-E-R. And he suddenly, we've heard nothing from Dawkins about the eye being supposedly wired backwards, because now we've discovered what's going on. That the light cones are deliberately not right in front of the retina, because if the photons were just bombarding the sensitivity, the sensitive part, which is at the back, then you would go blind almost immediately. There are very complicated optic systems which mean that the cones appear to be wired to us the wrong way round. The same thing has been found about the laryngeal nerve, right? There are answers to why the nerve appears to go all the way round the lung and come back up to the throat. People have consistently actually argued against those who try to maintain, oh, what a poor system. And you talked about, in your first part, well, what about all those people who suffer from disease? You decry and refuse to take account of the answer that I'm going to give. Why? Because you presuppose that this world has always been the same as it is. You are the one, sir, I may say, gently, but I say it firmly, who in your question, right at the end of the first question, derided a possible answer. Why? Because you have a prejudice which says you must take the position which is that the world has always been the same as it is now. Why? When much in me shows that there are things wrong morally, right? So is it not, despite what you say, is it not a reasonable position to take that maybe the Bible is right? That men did not die in the beginning, and that death and all the suffering that you refer to, which I, of course, grieve about myself. I don't know whether you have a son die in your family. I have. I know what it is to hold a dead child. I know what it is to. Everything told me. Everything told me the right. That we die, don't tell me the Bible answer. I suggest to you that you are dismissing what many Christian doctors confirm, that there are genetic mutations which bring genetic disease. That's only part of the disease, of course. Diseases come from viruses, many diseases come from all sorts of infections, we all know that. But the genetic diseases in particular show something twisted in our very DNA that is not now working as it originally did, the system that you refer to, is of a hugely sophisticated system that we're not properly yet understanding. But the more we go on with the Christian worldview, many Christians are in the vanguard as medics, beginning to resolve matters. Thank you.
You want one more? You want one more crack?
I had my second.
No, he's had his say. I think we need to have one. But I do thank him for his question.
Yes, thank you.
And his statement.
Who else? Anyone have a question? Can you come over here?
Can you come over here?
Come over here on the side.
Now, we said we'd give quite a lot of time to the first questioner, but I think from now on, in all questions, we should keep it to one point, put succinctly.
My question is also about the irreducible complexity.
You're welcome.
I can still see how the irreducible complexity can come about through natural selection, because from what I gather, a lot of the systems that are interlocking are like very small, like micro.
That naturally it doesn't work. You cannot make the sophisticated system of DNA, which I mentioned to the first questioner, and which of course was in my talk briefly, about the DNA having a digitally, essentially it's a digitally controlled system for making the very thing which is necessary, which is ATP, which actually causes the DNA itself to polymerize. And the DNA makes DNA codes for DNA polymerase, right? A DNA polymerase is a machine for making, guess what, DNA, right? So there is an interlocking which involves non-material, non-energetically defined software which interacts the machinery, which itself is not going to work thermodynamically. That argument on the thermodynamics was crucial, by the way, because it's top down, not bottom up. You cannot get this gradually, bit by bit, bolt by bolt. You've got to have the whole thing there together. No deep. Just let me summarize with one sentence and then I'll let you come back. Summarizing in one sentence, you cannot get life from non-life. It has never, ever been shown.
All those systems at one point, and then
through a mind.
Life does reproduce. So
that afterwards, I'm talking about life itself. You cannot, I am saying that without a mind behind it, you cannot produce life from life. You could put all the chemicals into a petri dish or something, but it will not produce life of itself. You need to get that stuff together.
Who else has a
But
question?
thank you for the question. Don't feel demoralized. You've been right to ask the question.
Go ahead, Siri.
Careful, careful.
Just follow up on saying that Darwin said that it could be demonstrated. Darwin said that if it could be demonstrated with any system of sufficient complexity that would have arisen without being shown over here. That it could be put together by gradual over time evolution. He said then that would disprove my whole theory. And if you look at like the bacterial flagellum, it spins at something like 1600 RPMs, and it's not something a lot of PhDs have looked at. And they said it would be extremely, almost, highly unlikely that you could gradually put that together. It has to function. It can only function by being put together all at time, not just gradually.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
First off, thanks for being
Hold your mic in your mouth.
That's good.
Leahy wrote a book, Darwin's Life. He concentrated mostly on the complexity and the irreducible complexity of the functional eye. Make some correlations between your arguments with the and his contentions as to the irreducible complexity of the eye. I found the book fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comment. Michael Behe was shot down by the gentleman in the Dover trial. It was
Ken Miller?
Yeah, Ken
Miller.
Is he from Brown University?
Ken
Miller from Brown.
Kenneth Miller shot down Michael Behe in his reasoning. And actually Michael Behe was right, because what seemed to be dismissing was this very matter that you just talked about, which is irreducible complexity. And that was the essence of Michael Behe's argument. I don't think the judge in the Dover trial in Pennsylvania really understood what was going on. Because I've written on this, by the way, it's just pertinent to the first question as a point, which I just realised I didn't answer, that he made the point that, you know, people are all sympathetic here. They're not necessarily, and what does it matter if they're sympathetic or not sympathetic? Actually, I've produced papers in secular journals with matter of what Michael Behe did and Kenneth Miller responding to it, right? Saying that actually the molecular system is full of irreducibly complex checking mechanisms, right? And it's that actually shows that Michael Behe is right. Because even if you were to argue that all the things like the bacterial flagellum came by chance, which is what Kenneth and others like it, you then have a huge problem. Because in the DNA itself, or in the cell itself, there is a checking mechanism which says, generally, if there's any mutation, boot it out, right? Boot it out, boot it out. If there's another one here, boot it out. That very checking mechanism, right, is checking to make sure that the DNA is actually correct. So if there is another mutation, and it sometimes does go through, it's so rare, right, that it's hugely difficult to get then another mutation, which would then make things worse, of course, and then another one, but of course this does happen. But the point is, you'll never get a mutation to act uphill in advantageous ways. Even Richard Dawkins admits that most mutations are deleterious. Now, this is why I'm stressing to you in every single question that it's a combination of a digital system and a thermodynamics system. Michael Behe was quite at pains to point that out. Now, of course, I pointed it out. He was asking for a connection with my work. Well, I pointed out the reducible complexity in the work on the Bombardier Beetle, but of course I wasn't looking at the DNA. But if somebody else were to look at the DNA, they would eventually that there are DNA parts which code for those valves. And guess what? There are some Bombardier Beetles which no longer fire. And nobody's yet done the work, but I wouldn't be at all surprised that when you look at the DNA of those creatures, that there'll be a sort of corruption of the bit which deals with the valves, but somehow that the valves are not properly closing, probably due to a mutational defect. So transition not only answers what's going on and Michael Behe's position, it also is predictive in nature. It predicts there will be mutations in some parts of the genome, in this case, of the Bombardier Beetle. Let me press this a bit further. I said that the design position opens up new areas of research. It's already been proven in the area of genetics that it got it right. Because the design position, and to be fair, the evolutionary position, noticed that there was a whole lot of DNA which was non-coded. The word got bandied about the phrase junk DNA. And for many about they were saying, it's junk DNA, it's junk, you know, it's just come from vestigial bits from the past. There was a few people saying, hold on, I don't think it is, John. It's just that we haven't yet understood it. 2012, a paper was produced by Cambridge in the Leeds, which had about 100 names on the paper. May not be quite 100, but it's certainly a lot. It took lines and lines to write all these names. And then they admitted everything is beginning to look like at least 30-40% of what we thought was non-coding, just not. It's actually switching mechanisms where the DNA isn't, we haven't understood it properly, but it's switches which are related to the coding part of DNA. In other words, hands up, they didn't quite do this. They should have done it. Hands up, we didn't fully understand the genome. We only understood a little few percent of the genome, but the genome is much more complicated. Why? Now, why it's so long to get to that position? Because, and this connects again, you asked the connection with what I was saying, because they were not asking the right questions. If they'd said, I'm open to a design position, they would have then said, okay, I don't understand DNA, which is about 80% of most genome. I need to ask questions about what is this doing? Instead of which, because of their evolutionary prejudice, they dismissed it as junk. Evolutionary science is costing billions today, some of it just by fortuitous logic where really the assumption of evolution doesn't really matter. Some of it makes success, particularly in the engineering medical world, right? But in terms of origin science, half the people are spending money to know that. If they came from a design position, we make much better progress sometimes in understanding diseases in particular.
No, we're out of time. We're out of time.
We are really.
I want to thank, let's give a round of applause. Thank you.
Don't forget the DVDs. Don't forget.
Come on down and as we pack up. And,
John, just let me say,
yeah,
don't forget, if you'd like personally to get this booklet of the relevance of Christianity, please come and see me. I'd love to talk to you.
Please give a gift here to Chris to help this meeting. Thank you so much. Thanks for being patient for our start. Back in 1986, Ed Max, the NIH, pseudo-dean argument.
I don't know.